comfortably zoned with the Zigzag Man in Alameda, California, pushing on the doors of life marked pull and fighting the unholy trinity as we go. Big business, organized religion, and government.
We are back, in case you're wondering, with George Case. I'm Ralph Tyko of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and we have a full panel this morning. David Hubler is here. Hello, David.
Good morning.
And Ron Rabinovitz.
How you doing, Ralph?
I'm doing quite well. We have a guest, and we're going to have two guests, one of whom arrived. George Case will introduce said guest, and I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you, George.
Well, thank you, Ralph, and look forward to today. And if Al Clark joins us, then we can have a very, interesting discussion about Trenton and baseball. But for the time being, I'd like to, introduce to everybody Al Downing, former Major League pitcher with both the Yankees and the Dodgers for the most part. Ronnie Rabinovitz will be very pleased to talk to Al, being a great Dodger fan. And, Al played for the Dodgers in Los Angeles, not in Brooklyn, but Al had a wonderful career. He and I first knew one another back in high school, so I've known Al for a long time, and we can talk about Trenton and baseball. And if Al Clark has joined us from the umpire's point of view, and the fact that Al was a Trenton native as well, we can have a very nice discussion. To start this, I'd just like to mention a little bit about Al Downing. Al had a wonderful Major League career, and in 1961, his Major League debut was against the expansion Washington Senators when my dad was coaching third base for Washington. And there was a photograph that somebody sent me not too long ago, a picture of my dad and Al, and they said, what was the connection? And I said, well, the connection was the fact that Al and my dad were both from Trenton, New Jersey, and both attended Trenton High School 20-some years apart. But it was quite ironic that Al's Major League debut would be against a team that my dad was coaching in 1961. And then a couple of years later, Al led the American League in strikeouts with 217, then went to the L.A. Dodgers and became a 20-game winner. So Al had a wonderful Major League career and also a career in broadcasting after he retired. So, Al, I'd like to have you talk a little bit, if you would, about your early days in baseball, what I know about, but you might want to talk about your days in Trenton and the Trenton Babe Ruth League.
Sure, George. Be glad to do it. Thank you very much for having me on. It's a pleasure always to talk to the audience around the Mercer County and Trenton area. Like most youngsters my age, George, like our age, back in the day when we came up in Trenton, we had a very extensive youth program. And one of the main arteries of that was what's called the Parks and Recreation League. And most kids started playing in that when they were 10, 11 years old, and then we all of a sudden got little leagues, and they were in the various areas of Trenton, and then some of the kids gravitated towards Little League, and from there on they went to the Babe Ruth League. And I started my career actually in what they call the Police Athletic Little League, which was county-wide, so it wasn't relegated to just one specific area of Trenton. And I played in that for 1 year, and then I went to the Trenton Babe Ruth League, and I played in that for 2 years, 55 and 56. And what was unique about that, that also was county-wide, and we had probably one of the strongest Babe Ruth leagues in the whole of New Jersey, I think, because we actually won the championship both years, 55 and 56, and then in 56 we won the national championship out in Portland, Oregon. So that basically was the genesis of my starting as a youngster playing. Of course, it was culminated by going to Trenton High and playing for Carl Kelly Palumbo, who was a legendary coach at that time, and he had taken the Trenton Post 93 Stros to the national championship in 1948. So when you played for the Stros, there was the equivalent then of playing for the Yankees of amateur baseball. So it was a great thrill.
You know, Al, I wanted to mention one thing you and I know about, and you and I talked about the other day, but showing that baseball is such a small world. Kelly Palumbo, who was the coach, Al Downing's coach with the Trenton Stros, was my dad's catcher when my dad pitched for the Trenton Stros in the 1930s. So it's amazing when you look, and Al Clark and I've had some similar circumstances talking about baseball and the fact that it is a small world. But here, Al Downing's high school and Trenton Stros baseball coach was my dad's, one of his best friends, Kelly Palumbo, who was his catcher when my dad was pitching for the Trenton Stros in the 1930s.
Also, he was the
George, let me chime in here for a minute. Al, it's good to talk to you also. This is Al Clark in beautiful colonial Williamsburg, Virginia.
Nice to hear your voice.
Yeah.
It's good to talk to you too, my friend. A couple of things. Number one, that debut in Washington that you guys were talking about, my dad, Herb, covered that for the Trentonian, and I remember the piece. Number two, that was a big deal for all of us in Trenton, Al matriculating to the big leagues. Number two, the reason I wore number 24 on my big league uniform was because of Al Downing. I was a major Al Downing fan growing up. Although Al was a couple of years older than myself, he was a stalwart individual, on and off the diamond, and he was someone, my goodness, I looked up to and hoped to emulate. So I wore number 24, and that was Al's number when he went up to the New York Yankees initially. And one of my biggest thrills in baseball, near the end of Al's career, he was pitching or trying to catch on in the final year with the Cincinnati Reds, and in spring training, Al was pitching with the Cincinnati Reds in the old ballpark in Miami. And I was working home plate, and my goodness, here my idol was 60 feet away, and I'm calling balls and strikes for him. That was pretty good.
Oh,
Did you give me any breaks
great.
that day, Al?
Oh, heck yes, I did, Al.
Yeah, I was just going to ask that, Al, if he gave you a good strike zone.
Yeah. I couldn't do anything about the home runs, though.
Well, when you hear the stories, there'll be a lot of stories between Al Clark and Al Downing and myself about Trenton baseball. But it really was a wonderful experience for all of us. And we've talked before about Trenton being halfway between Philly and New York, and the fact that it really was a hotbed of amateur baseball, and really had a tremendously long professional history as well. Willie Mays played in Trenton in 1950. And then with the current Trenton Thunder, they've been one of the most successful minor league franchises, and they're now a farm club of the Yankees. They had been a farm club of the Tigers initially, and then the Red Sox, and now the Yankees. So there are certain players who have come down to Trenton on rehab from the Yankee organization, and the Trenton fans have been privileged to have players of Roger Clemens, Derek Jeter, and that caliber player come to Trenton for rehab. And Al Clark probably had one of the most distinguished umpiring careers, and really started in the Trenton area. And he mentioned his dad. His dad, Herb Clark, was a sports writer in Trenton who covered my dad when my dad was playing. So again, between Al Downing, Al and I played high school basketball and baseball against one another, and Herb Clark and Al Clark and my father, long relationship, and again, proving that sports and baseball is really a very small world.
I don't know that a lot of people remember.
So certainly it.
Well, but Herb covered me not only in baseball, but also in basketball. And I remember years later when I had retired from baseball, and I was walking through the airport in Philadelphia, and I was coming into Philly, and Herb was going somewhere with this guy Frank Dogan. And Herb says to me, "Oh, how you doing? How you doing?" And I said, "Fine, Herb, Mr. Clark." He said, "Are you in the New Jersey Hall of Fame yet?" And I said, "No." He says, "We'll get you in." And I was in about a year later. so that's how Herb operated.
I have a basic
That's
question.
pretty cool.
I forgive my ignorance, but what was the nickname of the Trenton team then? I never heard that one before. The Schroes?
Well, you're talking about the Schroes.
The Schroes was.
Yeah,
they were named after a war hero by the name of Raymond Schroth.
Team, right?
What's that?
They were named after a war hero by the name of Raymond Schroth.
Right.
Schroth.
They were the most. Okay. They were the most powerful American Legion team, one of the best in the country. In 1948, they were national champions. But the fact is that the Trenton Schroes traditionally, in American Legion baseball nationally, were one of the better teams in organized baseball from an amateur level rather than a professional level. They were outstanding.
Okay. I just never heard that name before.
Hey, listen, allow me to ask Al a question. Al, you obviously have gone through a great, tremendous career, but your first championship was with the Trenton Babe Ruth League in 1956, I guess it was. Was that as big a championship win as getting to the big leagues and playing in a World Series and that kind of thing?
Oh, at that point in my life, yes. Because I mean, again, you have to remember, the genesis for Babe Ruth League was actually in Hamilton Township. It was called a Little Bigger League.
Right.
And then after 1 year,
absolutely.
And then after 1 year or 1 or 2 years, they changed the name to the Babe Ruth League. And it was like a lot of kids around Mercer County and around the Pennsylvania, Jersey area, you wanted to play Babe Ruth League ball, and remember 55, the Morrisville team won the Little League championship, right? So now
that's
they
right.
won the Little League championship in 55, Dick Hart, Danny Poland, Danny Napoleon, and then 56 we come along
right.
and we win the Babe Ruth League championship. So that was a big deal at that time. And for a lot of us youngsters, I mean, a lot of my teammates, I still get cards from them, birthday cards, Christmas cards, Jerry Shimoleski, Franco Catallo, Brian, guys like that. And we reminisce about those days and what they meant in our lives. And so we've stayed very close. And I've always said that really led to a lot of lifelong friendships. And so it was more than just winning the championship. It was so many other aspects of our lives that it touched.
Well, I wanted to mention one thing. And
wonderfully valuable are those times.
Yeah.
Oh,
you know what, Al?
Like they say in the commercial, priceless.
Well, Al Clark and Al Downing,
right.
you both mentioned Morrisville as an example. In 1955, Morrisville did win the Little League World Series. Morrisville was right across the river from Trenton. And I played in the Morrisville Little League in 1952-53. And in 55, many of those youngsters were, kids that I competed against when I was a 12-year-old. They were 10. So, and you talk about lifelong friendships. I have lifelong friendships with a lot of those gentlemen who now are, really were about the same age, but that was a big thing. So you had back-to-back world champions in the Trenton, Morrisville area, 1955, 1956 with the Trenton Babe Ruth League. So we've said before that area has always been a hotbed of amateur baseball, and that was an example. Two years in a row, national champions, one in Little League and one in Babe Ruth League.
That's great.
George, I can remember back in the...
Al?
Go ahead, Ronnie.
Yeah, this is Ron Rabinovitz. I'm a huge Dodger fan, and I loved it when you were pitching with us. You were terrific, and I followed your career, and it was terrific. I really thought you did a wonderful job.
Thanks, Ron.
Hey, that goes for me as a Yankee fan. Especially when you came up in '61. What a great team that was! I mean, you must have looked around and said, "My God, what are
It was culture shock for a number of reasons. Remember, I was just 2 years removed from high school, number one. Number two, a lot of the players who were my teammates also were fellows whose baseball cards I had collected. You can't go home and bring your shoebox of cards and say, hey, by the way, would you mind signing this 54 card for me?
Oh, that's too bad. You had a great collection. Yeah, that because 61 is a pivotal season for the Yankees throughout their history. I mean, people remember that season so well because of Mantle and Maris, but still, I mean, it was a wonderful, well put together team.
Well, one of the things that's really lost in that 61 season is, remember, that was the first year of the expansion. So you had new teams in the league.
Yeah.
And so now you had 20 teams as opposed to the 16 teams, so you had more ball players. And everybody said, well, the only reason they won is because the teams were weakened. If you look at the record, there are about 6 guys in Major League Baseball hit 40 home runs that year. And these were not guys who were poo-poo hitters. These were power hitters, but they had gotten lost in the minor leagues because when you only had 8 teams, maybe they were guys like Gentile who got lost in the Dodge organization, or, guys who just didn't get a chance to move up fast enough in the organization where they were playing. But now they got a chance to play on a regular basis, and people could see their talents.
Yeah, good point.
One of the
players. Hey, Al Clark, you were starting to say something earlier. I just was curious what that was about.
Well, the idea that Al Downing was the kind of person that he was. I grew up as, like I said, an Al Downing fan. I used to correspond with Al, and he was gracious enough to write back literally each and every time I wrote him a letter. After I got a little bit older and I had this huge scrapbook about Al Downing, I sent it to him. And there were all kinds of articles in not only the sporting newspapers and the Trenton papers and little paraphernalia that I had picked up because I was an Al Downing fan. I mean, he was my idol growing up. And he was gracious enough to accept it and wrote me the nicest letter back. And to this day, on my wall, I do have a picture of Al Downing and an autograph of him. And here I am, 26 years a Major League Baseball umpire, and I still admire the guy that I grew up admiring.
Well, one of the things, Al, that you did that really touched me and dear to my heart was when my brother Gene was in Vietnam. You got him a subscription to, I think it was Sporting News. Was it Sporting News?
Yeah, I sure did.
Yes, and that really
it was the Sporting News. It certainly was.
Yes.
I corresponded with Gene for a couple of years.
Yes, and that was that really got to me, that that you guys had that type of relationship and friendship, and of course you probably were still umpiring around Trenton when he was playing ball there.
I sure was. I certainly was, and I've been umpiring around Trenton for a long time. To the extent, George, I actually umpired in the Morrisville Little League back in the day.
Did you really? Okay.
Long time ago, man.
Well, I did realize that, Al. The fact is that, back then, Morrisville was one of the few communities, a small community that had a team, and we had a first Little League baseball stadium in 1953. We dedicated it, had grass infield, dugouts, electronic scoreboard, all that kind of stuff. And so, Trenton,
George, that was right along the river, wasn't it?
Yeah, it sure was. As a matter of fact,
that was right along the Delaware River.
Yeah, it's in what they call Island Park, and so many of the youngsters playing baseball today, and in the early days of baseball, really got their start, just like Al was talking about getting their start in Trenton, got their start playing baseball in Morrisville. So both Morrisville and Trenton. As a matter of fact, we also had exhibition games when I was playing Little League ball against the North Trenton All-Stars and that kind of thing. So, there's a lot of baseball history between those two towns, really separated only by the Delaware River. And I also wanted to mention one thing, Al Clark. You talk about Al Downing, but Al had a nickname called Gentleman Al, and he was the same person that I met when we played basketball and baseball against one another in high school. He was very gracious. Al and I, really about the same age. He destroyed us in basketball. Al was a terrific high school basketball player. In baseball, we were comparable to Trenton High when I played at Pennsbury, but in basketball, Trenton High and Al Downing, they were far superior to anything that we could put out on the floor. But Al was very gracious, very humble. And, we had a wonderful relationship that really started back then. And then a few years later, when they asked me, the city of Trenton asked me to do an exhibit called When Trenton Baseball Roared Like Thunder, Al was gracious to come in, and we had a nice conversation. They had a symposium at Waterfront Park, which was the home of the Trenton Thunder, and Al and I talked about, Trenton area baseball and what baseball meant to, his life as well as to mine. So Al has always been very gracious, and I'm so happy that we're able to talk to him today.
Well, it's always a pleasure for me not only to come back and talk on the air and people can hear us, but also to talk with you, Al Clark. And I remember, George, Al was the first umpire who had his name on his cap. Did you know that?
the first and only ever person in professional sports to have his name on his hat.
And he always took credit for that, too.
He took credit. What a great
Absolutely.
idea.
Yeah.
But another part Pardon?
Go ahead, Al.
Oh, no, another part of this mosaic is George K. Sr., George's dad. When I signed a contract with the New York Yankees, and I went down to Mr. Case's store and I said, Mr. Case, I just signed a contract with the New York Yankees, and I need a glove. So he says, okay, are you going to sign as a fielder or a pitcher? I said, well, I'm a pitcher, but you never know. He says, look, they got this new glove called the trapeze, and it's a 6-finger glove. He said, sign this in case you don't make it as a pitcher. And that was my first glove. That was a great glove, too.
Well, I remember Al telling me that. I remember Al telling me that story, and my dad had a lot of interesting stories about baseball players, and of course Al was one of them. One of the other stories was related to Willie Mays. When Willie Mays came to Trenton to play in 1950, my dad got a call from the Giants front office, and they said, George, we're sending a young prospect down to you. Give him whatever equipment he needs, and send the bill to us. And we think he's going to be a pretty good prospect. So, that's sort of an understatement when you call Willie Mays a pretty good prospect, because he turned out to be one of the greatest of all time.
Yeah, exactly.
How much money, George? George, do you know how much they spent to get him outfitted?
I have no idea. All I know is that I think my dad laughed. My dad laughed. He said, "Yeah." He said, "I probably sold Willie his undershirt and maybe his sliding shorts or something." He said, whatever it was. But as it turned out, Willie was really an unknown quantity at that point. But, he moved up so quickly because that was on Birmingham to Trenton to Minneapolis and then to New York City in his Hall of Fame career. So, again, when Al talks about my dad's sporting goods store, my dad had a lot of, wonderful stories that I heard as a youngster. And one was the Willie Mays story and the other one was the Al Downing story. So, it's good to hear Al talk about that.
Well, you never forget your past, and you never forget good people that you met in that past that were so important to your life and to your career. And, just little conversations your dad and I had that day about, starting into baseball. And I'll tell you another gentleman who really gave me some interesting advice about starting into baseball, and I met him. I didn't meet him. I'd known him for years, but I met him up at the Y over on Clinton Avenue, and that was Bo Belinsky. And Bo said, "Hey, Al, I heard you just signed with the Yankees." I said, "Yeah." And Bo, he said, "Look," he said, "let me give you some advice. Don't take any stuff from anybody." He said, he had been in the Oriole organization for years. He and Dean Chance, and the Orioles made the brilliant decision to put both of them out in expansion. They both wound up with the Angels. But then when you look in retrospect what the Orioles had in their arsenal of pitchers coming up, you understand why they let those two guys go, because they had all kinds of talent down there. But Bo was always a great guy for me to talk with, and whenever I would see him out here, we would talk about growing up in Trenton and playing ball, because he played in the recreation service league and being a pitcher. And he said, "Boy, I wish I could have had more time, but time doesn't wait for you."
Well, Bo's
personality. Wasn't Bo a pretty good pool player also?
As well, as Al knows, Bo's personality and Al's personality are totally different. But he certainly the fact that Bo was from Trenton and was a major leaguer, and really I think his lifestyle probably shortened his career. He did become, I believe, a born-again Christian and did a lot for the community later on. But Bo had a rather wild lifestyle at the beginning. And, I think it probably shortened his career. Where on the other hand, Al Downing, following his career, and Al, you might want to talk a little bit about it. You got into broadcasting and did quite a bit, for the Dodgers. And I think you told me the other day that you did something with the Yankees old-timers game not too long ago.
Yes, I did. But, getting back to Bo for a minute, Bo, I think one thing that happened to Bo, I think, is that you go from in the minor leagues and all of a sudden you're in Los Angeles because that's where the Angels were playing at that time. And you're expected to be a finished product. Remember, because both he and Dean Chance basically were young kids in the minor leagues. And all of a sudden now, as an expansion player, and Jim Fregosi was in that group, all of a sudden you're in the major leagues. And people expect you to pitch like a major leaguer, and it puts a lot of pressure on a guy. But I was very fortunate that during my playing career with the Yankees, especially the first few years, we had Red Barber up there. We had Mel Allen, and then Jerry Coleman was there for a while, Joe Caragiola. Of course, then the Scooter came along, or Frank Messer. And I would listen to these gentlemen talk, and every day, you'd have a show, whether it was a pregame show or postgame show, and some of the old veterans we had who had been in 5 World Series would say, I don't want to do the interview. Let the kid do it. And I was doing all these interviews, and with all these interviews came a catalog that said, pick out a gift, where you want a washer, a dryer, and this is really going back. You want a hi-fi, a stereo hi-fi? Sure, I'll take that. Yeah, you want a 14-inch television? And where are you getting all this stuff, I was talking about going on radio. But I got an affinity for going on broadcasting and for talking. And when I was out in Los Angeles years later, Jerry Doggett, who was working at that time with the broadcast group, he said to me one day, he said, Al, when you retire, you ought to think about going into broadcasting. So I subsequently went into broadcasting. Then about 1995, I'm working on CBS Radio, and we had a fellow, Jimmy Hunter, whose dad used to produce the television shows for the Dodgers, for the Yankees over at Yankee Stadium, and Jimmy was from Clifton, New Jersey, and he says to me, he broadcasts for the Orioles, I think, now on radio, and Jimmy says to me, hey, Al, my church is having a fundraiser, and could you come in, and we're going to have Bill White, and the Scooter's going to be there. I said, okay, so they let me lead off the show and say something. And I'm talking about Trenton, I'm talking about baseball in New Jersey and playing for the Yankees. And the next speaker up was a Scooter, and he says, Downing, I never heard you talk so much. So many wonderful things happened, through not only my life as a player, but subsequently in the broadcasting industry. You meet wonderful people in every walk of life. It's just being receptive to meeting people and corresponding with them.
Does Scooter ever refer to you as a huckleberry?
No.
She gave that name to just about everybody at one time or another. It was a terrific.
Al just hit on something that.
Go ahead.
Al just hit on something very, very important. People ask me as an umpire who are the bad guys or who are the tough guys to deal with, and quite the contrary to that statement or that question, there are so many more good people all around the big leagues and baseball in general than the tough guys or the bad guys. And all one has to do to see that, even as an umpire, is to extend yourself a little bit. Just like in any walk of life, extend yourself a little bit, smile, say hello, and create an ambiance as Al Downing did his entire career, as I tried to do my entire career. And you find out that, my goodness gracious, you put on a big league uniform as an adult, and life doesn't get a whole lot better than that, guys. Wouldn't you say, Al?
So that's the dream of a lot of youngsters, and people say often, they say to me, did you ever dream about being a major league ball player? I said, no, I always dreamt about when I took a ball up on the roof of my house, catching it when it came down, but I pretended I was the Willie Mays or Duke Snyder or Carl Ferrella, but it was playing in the big leagues was behind my wildest dreams. But what George alluded to earlier about my participation in the recent old-timer game, for the second year in a row, Paul Olden, who does the in-house broadcasting now, he asked me, he said, would you work with me on the what they call these Legends game now? They don't call them old timers. So he says, would you work with me and be the commentator? And I said, sure, I'd love to do it. And so the first year I did it, one thing I said, it used to be difficult to catch fly balls. I said, but in this game, the ground ball is the nemesis of the old timers because they can't bend down to catch it. But you can't say that on a PA system. Guys wouldn't take it too well. But like Al mentioned, though, the good guys outnumber the guys who are really not the good guys. And usually what happens is guys who really become, for want of a better word, jerks, they don't last long. I mean, because these are the guys who bounce around and their teams realize that this guy is not good for my clubhouse, he's not good for my team. I want guys who can play the game because everybody who gets to that big league level, who wears that uniform, has the ability to play there if given an opportunity. Some guys just don't get that opportunity or get enough of an opportunity. And that's why you have 25 players. And you look at ball clubs now and they say, why can't this guy play? Well, everybody gets their turn, but when your turn comes, you better be ready to take advantage of it because if you don't, we always talk about Wally Pipp, and I don't know how many people remember Wally Pipp. But everybody says, well, if you don't, they're going to send you to AAA and, you'll become Wally Pipp.
Yeah.
I wanted to, Al
is so right about.
Yeah,
Al is so right about guys being in the big leagues. Even the worst guy or players that fans consider to be not good players, if they're on that 25-man major league roster, they are among the best players in the world. And given the opportunity, each and every one of them will perform at that level. And that's the same with the umpires, too. The umpires have been scrutinized throughout the minor leagues for years and years and years. Even umpires that fans don't consider to be very, very good are among the best in the world. You don't get to put on that big league uniform unless you are, and there are very, very, very few mistakes of guys that are in the big leagues.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to, Al Clark, now that you mentioned that, I was going to talk about this for a minute, but what's your opinion on the instant replay, when it comes to the umpires' calls and stuff? Now, the reason I'm asking it because they keep talking about the fact that baseball, the game is so long and blah, blah, blah. But, whenever there's a replay and whoever signals it, then they've got to take the time and they go through the whole, situation with the umpires and the control booth and judging the call. What's your opinion on instant replay, and is it worth the time and effort that goes into it, or should it go back to the way the game used to be when you were umpiring? Hey, umpires make a call. They're human beings. Occasionally they'll make a wrong call, but that's the nature of the game. So the replay has certainly changed it as far as I'm concerned. I was just curious as to what your opinion is.
I think you're right. It has changed the game. One has to consider first and foremost that technology is here and it's here to stay. And instead of fighting it, let's embrace it. I think the system that's used now needs to be tweaked and made better. One must also consider that our job as umpires is to try and get as many plays and situations correct as we possibly can. And if the technology can help, it's not going to go away. I think that the instant replay doesn't prove how wrong the umpires are. I think it proves how right the umpires are. Does it show we're wrong once in a while? Sure it does. But on the large majority of times, I believe it shows how right the umpires are, and it earns umpires at the major league level even more respect than they've got now. Like I said, our job is to get as many plays and situations right as possible, and if the technology can help, so be it. Yes, I think it needs to be tweaked, but it's not going away.
Well, Al Clark, I think along those lines, these instant replays often show how difficult it is to make that call and make it correctly, because you see it from different angles, and sometimes you still can't tell whether he's safe or out. And so I think it shows just how difficult that call is to make on the spur of the moment.
That's why the umpires have years and years of minor league work, and before they're even considered, to be a major league umpire.
Mm-hmm. And Al, correct me if I'm wrong, but part of your training also is to make sure that you, as an umpire, wherever the position that you're, umpiring, you're in the correct position to make the call.
Well, of course. I mean, that's all part of the training, not only in a 4-man system, but when a guy goes out, you revert to a 3-man system, and there's total movement all over. As I've said many times, the umpiring crew on the field is the third team on the field, and they work in cohesiveness with each other. They communicate like giving signals to each other, like a third base coach gives signals to the batter, and we do that all the time throughout the game. Folks that I speak with, and I talk to groups all over the country, I explain to them about that, and I tell them to watch the umpires for an inning or two, and watch the way that they communicate with each other. Watch the way they move. And lifelong baseball fans come back to me and never realizing that was going on the field. That's how proficient Major League Baseball's umpires are, really.
That's interesting. Very interesting.
Al, I just heard Ronnie Rabinovitz on here, and Ronnie is very modest, but I thought you should know. Ronnie and Jackie Robinson are very, very close friends. Jackie Robinson attended one of the early birthdays or bar mitzvah for Ronnie when he was a youngster, and Al Downing certainly benefited by Jackie Robinson when he broke the color barrier. The fact that Al Downing and Elston Howard were the first African American battery in the Yankees history, and I just wanted Ronnie to just step in a little bit and talk about his relationship with Jackie Robinson and his lifelong, love of the Dodgers.
All right.
Well, thank you, George, and Al. It's a pleasure having you on the show. What I want to mention, thank you. Yeah, Jackie and I were very dear friends. I was dear friends with him up until the time he passed away in 1972. And I'm on a committee right now called Honor 42 Within Her Lifetime, which is Rachel Robinson, the First Lady of Baseball. This Thursday, July 19th, will be her 96th birthday. God bless her. And she has done so much for this game and for the young people around the world and around this country. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the year after Jackie passed away, she started the Jackie Robinson Foundation, which is a scholarship program for children of color and minorities to go to college. And they have the greatest graduation rate of any scholarship program in the United States, 98%, which is way, way double the national average. So I'm on a committee to honor her in her lifetime. And I just wanted to mention her and wish her a very, very happy birthday this Thursday, July 19th, her 96th birthday. She's a magnificent lady, and with grace and charm, and what she's done for baseball and for young people all around the country has been wonderful. I don't know if you know.
You're absolutely right. For about 5 years, I served on the board of the Southern California version of the Jackie Robinson Foundation. That's when I became aware of all the kids they had over at UCLA. And they gave them mentors when the kids would come in. And, when they had the kids at the end of the year, they have a big function. They bring all the kids in. The kids were coming from Harvard and Yale and all these schools back east. I'm thinking, how do you get these kids in there? Well, like you said, the graduation rate is fantastic, yes.
It really is. It is fantastic. 98%, which is just fabulous. And I'm in touch with Rachel every once in a while. She's just a tremendous lady.
Person. Yes, she is.
Yeah, she really is.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Ronnie, because I was going to ask you about it. I know that I got an email from Richard Zamoff about that the other day. So he's very prominent in the
yes, he is. He's a very dear friend also at George Washington University.
Right.
So, yeah.
And we grew up together in the same building, same apartment building. Yeah.
That's great. No, he's a terrific guy, just terrific. Very dear friend.
I wanted to, Ronnie, thank you for that about Rachel. And I wanted to just ask Ralph Tyko. Ralph, you've been listening to all this. Do you have any questions or comments for Al Downing and Al Clark?
I do, and I've been listening and trying to enjoy the silence of my own voice. And, as Casey would say, you could learn a lot by observing or something like that. But in my question, of all of you guys, and you spoke about your dads, and we always talk about your grandparents and what have you. How about your moms? Trenton mothers. We'll start with Al Downey. What was your mom like in the raising you to be what you were process growing up?
Well, unfortunately, I lost my mom at the age of 7. I lost in an automobile accident. So I was more or less raised by my aunt and my dad. And of course, my dad had 7 brothers, and they acted like surrogate fathers. And my aunts, his 3 sisters, helped. And so I had a lot of guidance in that respect. But no one ever told me that I couldn't do anything, along the lines of, like what your pursuits might be. And no one said, well, you can't go try this. I remember the first time I said I want to go try out for the team member that I said in the Power League. All those teams were independently run, and it wasn't like you had one system. And so I had to go over to Trenton High and try out for the team with the Phillies. And no one said you can't do that. And I lived over in Reservoir Street up near the reservoir. And I made the team, and they made sure that I had any support that I needed in that pursuit. The only thing was you had to do well in school. You had to pay attention in school. And in those days, you went to a grade school in your neighborhood, so your teachers were very good friends with your parents. so you didn't act up because it would get home before you got home. But my family,
my teachers had an intimate relationship with my parents as well, but I wouldn't call it a friendship.
But I think for the most part, it goes beyond, in my case, like not having the mother, but having other women and adults as mentors. Everybody made sure that you had whatever you needed. I mean, and I wasn't a kid that was going around causing mayhem, but by the same token, I was a local kid. Go get a couple pieces off Miss Thomas's tree or something like that. A couple of pears off somebody's tree. Something like that. That was the extent of things. Don't play on the railroad tracks. Oh, sure, we will. We won't as long as the train's not coming. But I think you learn those lessons at an early age, and the teachers were so instrumental in that respect. And whenever I talk about growing up, teachers like second after my family, because they were the ones that had you most of all. And when you went to school, you sat down and you paid attention, and they kept you on the straight and narrow. And if you didn't, you went to the principal's office, which is another place you didn't want to go. And I think when you learn that discipline at an early age, you know what's required of you as a person.
Okay. Al Clark, your mom's role in your upbringing, if you would.
Well, I played in the Pal Cub League also, and I played for the Yankees, and my manager there or coach there was Mickey McGuire, and my mom didn't miss a game. And it was all the way through. I was a weak-armed catcher, and that's kind of why I became an umpire. When I realized it was a whole lot easier to call a curveball rather than hit one, I became an umpire. And my mom was there all the time, whether I was a player, whether I was an umpire, supporting me, just like Al said. The support system for us at that time was just tremendous. And like Al says, the teachers, my goodness gracious, probably the most underrated people in our society are primary education teachers, because they certainly set the morals and ways and that we live with the rest of our lives. And I like Al, appreciate the way that I grew up, where I grew up, and how I grew up.
Nice. David Hubler, you didn't grow up in Trenton, but you had a mom.
Yes. In fact, there was she and my father both taught me all about baseball. We were all avid Yankees fans. Growing up in the North Bronx, about 25 minutes by train down to the stadium. And my mother was I think I've told this story about how my parents used to see Babe Ruth when they visited a friend in an apartment building where Ruth had one of his girlfriends, and every once in a while they would see Babe Ruth. But my mother was a real baseball fan. She didn't go to the games. It was my father who took me to the games. But my mother, I could always ask her questions about baseball. And I remember one time, as kids want to do, I got picked on for something, and then all the kids went away to some other place, and they were supposed to play ball. And it was my mother who came down and took a ball and had a long catch with me out on the field, just to show them more than to show them that I could still play the game a little bit. So yeah, I mean, there were a lot of fond memories of my mother and our attachment to the Yankees.
Ronnie Rabinovitz's turn.
Yes. My mother was very supportive of me as I was playing Little League ball. She never missed a game. Just like if I was in a play at high school, she wasn't there opening night. She was there every night. Very, very supportive. And I was very fortunate to have such a wonderful mother and father, of course.
Nice. Now, the host of the show is George Case. You have 3 generations of juniors. You're George Case III. So let's start with your grandmother. What memories do you have? Even if you don't have memories, what memories were passed on by your dad of your grandmother, George?
Well, my grandmother was my dad's mother by my grandmother's second marriage. My grandfather had his first marriage. His wife had passed away in childbirth, but my grandmother was my dad's mother by his second marriage, and she was a wonderful lady. I remember her distinctly because I used to spend many hours at her home on Prospect Street in Trenton. Al will know, and Al Clark and Al Downing will know where that is. And, she was just a wonderful person. Taught me a little bit about family, a lot of, love of family, and that was passed down. My mother was that way. My mom was really the disciplinarian because she had to be. My dad was away so often, during the season. So when he was home, it was one thing, but during the season, my mom had to be a mother and father to me as a little boy. And, my first ball game, my mom would talk about, she took me to a game at Griffith Stadium. I was 6 months old. So I was in her arms, fell asleep, obviously, but that was my first experience, with my mom. And then my mom always told a story, and she laughed about it, and it's very funny to me now. But when I was 4 or 5, and we were in the stands at Griffith Stadium, and my dad had a bad game, he booted a ball or struck out or something, and some fan was giving him a hard time and calling him a bum and blah, blah, blah. As Al and Al Clark both know, you're a ball player, you hear a lot of stuff from the stands. But I stood up as a 4 or 5 year old and told that man, "You can't talk about my daddy that way. Please be quiet." And so the guy was so embarrassed, he sat down. My mom said he never said a word after that.
Great story. Gentlemen, this is terrific. Thank you.
This has been fun.
Al Downing, Al
Thank
Clark,
you.
our guest, Ronnie Rabinovitz, a panel member returning, David Hubler, a regular, and, of course, George Case III, the tremendous. You are the keeper of Trenton's lore. George Case.
I appreciate that, and I certainly appreciate the fact that Al Downing and Al Clark took the time today to talk about Trenton and baseball. It's been fun for me.
Well, it's been a big part of my life.
Lots of fun here too.
And I always enjoy talking about that.
Yeah. Well, I'll never associate Trenton only with Campbell's soup again.
Hey, one question for Al Downing. Are you Al, are you going to Cooperstown next week?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. You know, I haven't been there since the year I saw you up there. You know, they move guys around. They get 3 or 4 guys every year they're coming up there. So that
for sure.
That's the last time I was up there. I always enjoy the opportunity to do that. You know, what's good about it, and this is again one of the parts about baseball and about sports that kind of overlooked. You play against a guy 8-10 years. Not that you don't like them. It's just that they wear a different uniform trying to beat their brains out. And all of a sudden you get to Cooperstown and you're signing autographs for a week, and then everybody's your friend. And one of the guys I've always liked was George Foster. If you remember, in 78, he was on the Cincinnati Ball Club at that time when I was there trying to make that ball club. And George is always there. So we're all sitting up there, and they have that little parade on Saturday where the players come over in hot flatbed trucks, and they parade down the street with their families. And all the players are sitting up there watching, and the players on the trucks who are Hall of Famers are waving to us, you know, and everybody's wondering, who are those guys up there like, you know? Like Bert Campaneris and Al Downing and George Foster. Who are those guys?
Wow.
Well, I'll tell you what you're saying, Al, is so absolutely true. Here I am in an adversarial type situation as an umpire, and I walk around the streets and see all you guys that are signing, and guys see me, and they literally get up and give me a hug. And the baseball family, which epitomizes the baseball family, is just a tremendous, tremendous lure to be a part of.
Well, you know, for years they had the Joe DiMaggio Foundation baseball game down in Fort Lauderdale. That game was started by Billy Williams. I don't know if you remember Billy Williams, the umpire.
Sweet swinging.
Sure I do. Of course I do.
Yeah, he's from Jersey.
No, Billy Williams, the umpire.
Yes, the umpire. And he and Joe Linsalata, who lived down in Hollywood, Florida, they started that foundation, that celebrity game to raise money for the Memorial Hospital, which subsequently opened a wing called the Joe DiMaggio wing of the Memorial Hospital. And we would get 70, 80 players a year down there. And once a year, we would all get together and talk about the old times. And we have auctions, and we have autograph signings, and a baseball game. And it was such a great way to kind of like reminisce and talk about the game of baseball and let the fans see these players who had competed against one another for so long all of a sudden morph into being adults, responsible adults. You know, we weren't playing that kid's game anymore, responsible adults. And
supposedly.
And having fun doing it, yes.
Al, let me ask you.
I remember Billy Williams and Joe Linsalata very, very. Do you ever remember seeing Joe Linsalata without a cigar?
No, I never saw him that much off the field. They had the games.
Al,
yeah, sure.
You experienced many old-timers days with the Yankees, and DiMaggio came in and out of your lives. Any Joe DiMaggio stories you'd like to pass on?
Well, I have 2 stories. One involves Bobby Doerr, the other involves Joe DiMaggio. See, I only surround myself with old-timer baseball players who are Hall of Famers. I'm just kidding, of course. But my first old-timers game was 1963, and in those days, the old-timers dressed in the locker room with the current players. Today, we don't do that. And my first locker mate was Bobby Doerr. And I was a Red Sox fan growing up, believe it or not, and my favorite player, of course, was Ted Williams. And the second favorite player was Bobby Doerr, then Vern Stevens, Zeke Zarilla, et cetera, et cetera. And so Bobby, he says, I'm Bobby Doerr. I said, I know Mr. Doerr. I know who you are. I know you. And we talked. Well, they finished their game, and by the time we start our game and finish, you know, they're gone. And I come back to my locker, and Pete Sheehy, who was our equipment man at the time, says to me, he says, is that your glove? And I said, no, I think Mr. Doerr left it there. And so he says, oh, write a note. I wrote a nice note about, you know, having met you and everything, and here's your glove. And we sent it to him back in Oregon. About a month later, I get a letter from him thanking me for having turned his glove back. He couldn't remember where he lost his glove. Well, he hadn't been lost. It had been in my locker. The second story is about Joe D. And Joe D's last time at Yankee Stadium in an old-timer uniform, Joe D came up. He hit a line drive down the left field fence that went into the seats, home run. He, like Joe, that little trot. And the last time he put that uniform on, after that, he always wore a blue suit, very neatly dressed, and walked out on the field and waved to the fans. and he was a very regal presence, without a doubt.
Well,
that's great.
Memories. This has been terrific for the Comfortable
Been so much
Radio
fun.
Network.
Yeah.
Anything anybody wants to close with? Anything that's a thought that anybody left hanging that you'd like to complete? Start with you.
I'd just like to thank Al Downing and Al Clark and George. This was a terrific show, and I really enjoyed being part of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. David, anything you want to add?
You betcha.
No, I was in awe of listening for most of this show.
As was I. This is
That's great.
really tremendous. George, what would you like to add?
I don't want to add anything except to thank Al, bothAls, for coming on, and it's just so much fun for me to just talk baseball history, and and then to put the added emphasis on our backgrounds in Trenton was real special to me. So I wanted to thank both Als and look forward to doing this again sometime.
Beautiful. Before we go, I want to give the message of the station. I would like anybody who's listening, who listens to any of our offerings, to kindly box up some lightly, gently, new, any way you take them, children's books, and bring them to the Head Start program wherever you live. For obvious reasons, these kids need to learn to read, become school ready, develop an imagination, get their noses out of the devices and the computers, and enjoy what we all enjoyed as kids, reading and having our passions fueled by books. So bring them down, box them up, get the neighborhood together, get as many books to the Head Start program, because children are our future. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here, and we will return when we do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
George. Al, thank you.
Thank you.
Much fun.
You betcha.
All right.